We're going to talk to a politician now who's the mayor of Greater Manchester, that's Andy Burnham, who's at a bit of a watershed moment, to such an extent that, Andy, good evening to you. You have written a letter. And who have you addressed that letter to?
Good evening, Eamonn. I've written it to the 10 people vying to be our next Prime Minister.
Why?
I've invited each of them, if successful, to come and address the Convention of the North. So together, Eamonn, with other political leaders from across the North and business leaders, we're gathering the whole of the North of England together at a big conference in early September. And I'm saying to all of these people who want to run this country, you need to show your commitment to the North of England now. We are at a watershed moment in British politics, Eamonn. People here were promised a northern powerhouse, but we're still waiting. And patience in the North is definitely running out. We're only hearing more of the same from these leadership candidates, but I can honestly say to you, people here won't have that. We need commitments to the North now to close this divide. Likened recently by somebody as eminent as Lord Bob Kerslake as the divide between West and East Germany going back to the 1980s. You know, this cannot carry on.
Yeah. Andy, you've seen it from both sides. You're born in the north and northwest. You're the mayor of Greater Manchester. You've served as an MP and as I think you were a cabinet member. You were indeed here at Westminster. Does that divide really exist?
It really does, Eamonn. In so many ways, I could illustrate it, but let me give you just one: transport. And particularly the cost of transport. Where you are, a single bus journey costs £1.50. I think I'm right about that, aren't I?
No idea. Never used them.
It might be £2 now.
It's quite cheap. Here, it can cost £4, and that's true for people right across the north of England. The transport system we have is nothing like yours. London has a daily cap on what you can spend travelling around. Here, people can spend a lot more. So, yes, it really does exist.
Yeah.
But, Eamonn, this is not a party political attack. I want to make that clear. The government that I was in didn't do enough to close the north-south divide. This goes back to the way the country has been run for decades, centuries possibly. My argument is Westminster has failed the north of England, and that's Westminster under all colours of government. The country is inherently London-centric, and that has to change. You know, we've hit a point here in British history where the country is more divided than it's ever been, and it is very divided on geographical lines.
But Andy,
to
politicians who were saying, look, we're trying to do our best. Look at HS2, for instance. Okay, yeah, it's so far to Birmingham, but then there are plans to bring it further. Where do you stand on HS2?
Well, I'm in favour of it, Eamonn, as long as it comes with west to east connectivity across the north. Modern high-speed connections between Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds and beyond. HS2 does not solve the transport problems of the north, and sometimes it's sort of suggested that it does. It really doesn't. It helps a lot, but I'm talking about having a London-style transport system in the next 10 years where we can have a daily cap on what people can spend, where we can have £1.50 single bus journeys, where we can have a rail system that you can rely on. And we're still seeing our trains cancelled on a daily basis, people packed on these clapped-out trains. We've got these pacer trains, Eamonn, that should have been phased out decades ago, and they're still trundling around. It's just, honestly, it's not good enough. And as I say, I'm blaming governments of all colours. And a phrase I often use when I was in Parliament, this London-centric system has got to change.
Yeah, it's got to change. And, it beggars belief in a way. I'm a Belfast man who came to England in 1986 and I moved to Manchester. And I was frightened stiff about living in a massive big city like Manchester. And it was the most friendly, wonderful place with the greatest football team that you could ever imagine.
I thought you'd get onto that.
Being there.
And he still thinks that.
But it was wonderful. It was a wonderful, friendly place. And, whether it was Liverpool, whether it was Leeds, whether, the idea, that in a way, when I then had to move because of work down to London, that this place that I loved was like a second home, would in some way be treated differently by London, which I have to say, living here, I don't feel any connectivity. I don't feel connected to London at all. I feel no reason for being here except I have to work. And the idea that there would be a distinction between North and South shocks me. But I think it is absolutely there, and people should know their history, and they should know how the country functions. And the idea that everything stops at the Watford Gap, is insulting, isn't it?
Oh, honestly, Eamonn. I mean, I remember you mentioned me being in government. I was in Gordon Brown's government, and I was the culture secretary, if you remember.
That's right.
And I was responsible for the move of the BBC to Salford.
Yeah.
And I wish I'd written down the things that senior BBC executives were saying to me at that time about how we don't want to live in a wasteland where you can't get nice coffee and God knows all of these sort of things that they were saying at the time, that it would be the end of their life as they've known it if they had to move to Salford. I would put it to you, Eamonn, that the BBC as a media organisation is immeasurably stronger today because it reflects voices more from all parts of the country, North West, Northern Ireland, everywhere, because it's in Media City Salford, than when it was in its ivory tower in London 10 years ago. Now, I want to just get over, because I know many of your listeners will be London-based and they'll be sort of bristling at some of what I'm saying. I am not anti-London. I'm a patriotic person. I'm quite proud of the capital city. I look back on London 2012 with great fondness. But the country's got to be about more than London, hasn't it? And there's got to be a fairness in the way all people and all places are treated. I kind of feel that what underlay the referendum result in 2016 was a sense of unfairness about the way things were done, that some places got looked after more than others. And I think that came through at that vote in 2016. And now, as we kind of try and bring the country back together, we've got to close these geographical divides, and particularly the north-south divide.
Andy, of the current Tory leadership candidates, who do you think is most likely to look north and be sympathetic to all the things that you want to do?
It's a good question, Jackie. I mean, I've been listening carefully to what they've all been saying. I'm not hearing enough from them, to be honest. I did say it was a bit more of the same so far. I think Sajid Javid has a genuine commitment to devolution and seeing some kind of fairness across the country. Rory Stewart has impressed me with some of the things that he's been saying, but I'm not hearing enough at the moment from the others, and that's why I issued this invitation to them. We're holding this big event in September, the Convention of the North. They can all commit now to come, if they're successful, if they're Prime Minister, to come to that event, and it would send such a powerful signal. Jackie, this isn't just me, a politician just sort of sounding off on the radio. All of the newspapers of the north of England came together yesterday to issue this Power Up the North call. And that tells you that this goes far deeper than politics. This is felt in our business community, in our faith communities. It's kind of widely shared. And that Lord Kerslake report that came out recently, the 2070 report, it was a pretty damning indictment, wasn't it, of our country, that it was like Germany in the old East-West days. I mean, somebody of his stature wouldn't say something like that if there weren't some real injustices that need to be dealt with here.
So, guys, do you agree with Andy Burnham listening tonight? Do you think there are real injustices that have to be dealt with? Andy Burnham says Westminster has consistently failed the north of England, and governments of all colours have continued with an economic model which has built up London and the southeast, but which has not invested in the north. So he writes to these 10 leadership candidates for the Conservative Party, and he said, "It is in that spirit that I'm writing to find out whether, if you're elected as leader and Prime Minister, you will attend the second Convention of the North event, which will be hosted by Sheffield City Region, to be held in late August, early September. I look forward to hearing from you," says Andy Burnham. Andy, I would suggest they don't dare decline after that.
I hope not, Eamonn. But as I say, I'm saying this because I care not about scoring points. I care about the north of England. I think you know me well enough to know that's what's driven me throughout my political
fair play
career.
to you. Fair play to you. I like the idea of the investment. And Andy, when you stood for that mayor of Manchester, of Greater Manchester, that was a big thing. That was a big derivation for you, from central Westminster politics and whatever. Any regrets?
No, not really, none, Eamonn, to be honest. I was becoming increasingly disillusioned in that Westminster system. People might remember me working on Hillsborough, and that kind of revealed, that mindset that kind of is, if you can ignore the North, then we will ignore the North. How else could a whole city have been crying injustice all those years and not be heard if we had a country where there was a real fairness in the way different places were treated? I think that illustrates that we don't have that. So I became quite disillusioned with all of that, Eamonn, and I kind of saw as a Treasury Minister how more and more money went to the parts of the country that were already doing well. And in the end, when this job came along, I thought, well, you know, it's time for me to step outside of this and challenge it from the outside. And I'm happier doing it, to be honest with you.
From the outside, yeah. I often believe those who shout loudest are listened to. And you're talking about the north. I mean, but, you know, you think of all the people in the southwest of the country or the northeast of the country as well. I suppose figuratively, I mean, you're looking after your own patch, but you're probably speaking on behalf of them all. The sentiment's the same.
I think so. I am. I mean, obviously, I care about Greater Manchester first, the North West second, the whole of the North third. And I think, you know, the North East, if anything, gets the roughest deal of all. But whenever I come on a programme like yours, Eamon, and make these points, I get people from the South West or Essex or saying, hey, hang on a minute, you know, you think we have it easy, we don't. And it's true, there's real pockets of poverty, aren't there, scattered across the south. You know, if you look at transport infrastructure going out down to the southwest, it's not brilliant at all, is it? I think we've all lived in a country that's kind of revolved around London, to be honest. And I understand that people elsewhere feel exactly as strongly as I do. And I just think we have hit a bit of a watershed moment. You know, people do feel a sense of injustice about the way Westminster and Brussels combined has dished out the money. And I think we're saying now, come on, it cannot carry on like this. After all, it was the government that promised us a northern powerhouse. Yep. And I think that creates a moral kind of responsibility upon them to deliver it. To
stand by that. I think Esther McVeigh will be the first one to reply to you. I think that's her patch you're talking about. You'd like to think she would be.
Well, I hope so. I don't think I've heard from any of them yet, Eamon. So I hope some of them are listening, and I hope Talk Radio can pick up. Well,
we'll elbow them. We'll any of them come in here, I'll say, hey, did you get a letter from Andy Burnham? Have you answered it? We'll be right on that.
Why wouldn't they answer it though? I mean, why would they not go?
Well, Jackie, I honestly don't know. I mean, I would if I were them, because if you want to be Prime Minister, you're going to have the north of England with you. But I don't think any of them has said anything yet that the north of England has noticed, to be honest with you. People here are suffering very bad transport day in, day out. You know, there's people in the north who'll be late home to see their kids tonight because the trains are going to take half an hour longer than they should, or they can't get on the packed trains. It's those people they should be speaking to in seeking to lead our country. And as of yet, they're not doing that.